In the video The Myth of Dark Energy, some of the consequences of placing the zero time frame in the position of the isolated observer were discussed. The first one would be the apparent inversion in the direction of the arrow of time, which would have started to point continuously in the direction of our past. The notion of the past is born out of the hypothesis that time would not exist before the light from a distant star spreads on Earth. In other words, even if time existed within the star's cone of light, it could not be measured directly in the real direction of its movement, that is, in the direction of our future. Because it is always approached with delay, the present of that star would seem to be placed in our future. In this case, with the zero mark of time placed in our position, the concepts of present and future would be confused. The concept of the past, in turn, would also be illusory, as the gap in access would result from the retention of time in our future. Translating, the observer depends on his memory to interact with the reality around him, not being able to do it directly. Also in the aforementioned video was highlighted the capacity of the space itself to generate inertia, independently of the masses. This would be in line with the inflationary theory that holds that, as galaxies move away from each other at increasing speeds, they would not abandon their original position in space. The space around them would be stretching, as represented in the model of an inflating balloon. To generate inertia in a second moment, it would be necessary that, before, there was an increase in the elastic potential energy. Think of the model in which the space behavior was compared to that of a rubber strip. When stretching, the space would perform a negative work of separation between the extremities, with an increase in the potential energy. The space would stretch in one direction, and the force would point in the opposite direction. In the case of two neighboring galaxies, even if they were endowed with a memory, they would not be able to perceive any change in the space around them. This would be expected because, according to the theory of general relativity, when space stretched beyond certain limits, time would contract in a complementary way. By its very definition, memory does not exist outside of time. This emptiness of information, opened by stretching the space itself, and without depending on the masses, would tend to be filled by the galaxy in a second moment, as it would be associated with a generation of inertia. The galaxies would not move from their place, but would appear to be approaching each other, doing a secondary and positive work of mutual attraction, compatible with gravity. Gravity would not result from a force, but from the movement of simple accommodation to a previous change in the geometry of space. In this case, for our memory, the potential energy would already appear to be zero at infinity and negative at finite distances. This is what happens within space-time. It is seen that in this model, space would be managing the relative movement of galaxies from the outside to the inside, which generates much controversy. If, to get a sense of reality, you are dependent on your memory, and, therefore, dependent on the direct measurability of time, it is your memory that would establish the idea that the universe would have sides. What can be remembered would always be on the inside. What cannot be remembered does not exist. Another consequence of the action of our memory would be the apparent inversion in the direction of the arrow of time. Although this arrow always points towards the future, you can only remember what was already in your past. The inversion, in this case, is only apparent, although it is part of our physical reality. It is this inversion, promoted by our memory, that suggests that the light of the stars is coming from our past and not from our future. The problem is aggravated because, even if there was a discontinuity in the flow of information carried by light, that discontinuity would not exist after the light spread with us. It turns out that you could not accept that your conscience was acting discontinuously. Thus, when the light of a star was tracked towards our past, it would appear in the form of apparently continuous waves, which would attribute a delay, a variable duration for the time of displacement, of the light of that star. In this model of performance independent of space, information would be made available only in one of the elastic phases, that of its contraction. It is in this phase that time allows its measurement. The stretching phase, even if it existed, could not be described directly, due to the complementary contraction of time. This seems to generate a principle of exclusion of access between them, making the two phases act as if they were continuous. You wouldn't be wrong if you said that the universe would be expanding right now, and, at the same time, if you said it would be contracting. Perhaps, it was more correct to think that the universe was static in its origin, having entered a relative and continuous movement, only within the space-time. It is exactly there that we find what can be remembered by us.